Have you ever walked into someone's apartment and felt yourself, without even meaning to, exhale? Bare walls, a couch, a lamp, one shelf with maybe six things on it. And instead of thinking it looked empty, some quiet part of you thought, I could actually breathe in here. Most people meet a space like that and reach for a story. They must not be able to afford more. It looks a little cold, a little sad, even. There's this nagging sense that a real life should be fuller than that. But what if the person living there isn't missing anything at all? What if they've quietly figured out something the rest of us are still drowning in? Stay with me, because minimalism is almost never about the stuff. Here's what nobody tells you. The world looks at a minimalist and sees deprivation. Someone going without. Someone who has less than they should. But that's the wrong lens entirely. This kind of person didn't strip their life down to punish themselves. They stripped it down to protect something. And once you see what they're protecting, you can't unsee it. So let's start with your attention, not your time. Your attention. That narrow beam of focus you can only point at one thing at a time. Picture it as a single spotlight on a dark stage. Wherever it lands, that one thing becomes real and vivid and alive. Everything else drops into shadow. And here's the catch. You only get one spotlight. That's the entire budget. There is no second beam waiting backstage. Now picture your room. The pile of mail you keep meaning to deal with. The exercise bike quietly wearing a coat of clothes. The drawer that won't quite close. The charger for a device you no longer own. Think of all of it as objects standing on your stage, and every single one of them is waving, asking for a sliver of the light. Here's the part people miss. You are not consciously thinking about that unpaid bill. But some background part of you is. The clutter isn't just sitting there being clutter. It's talking. Softly, constantly, all day long. And this is where it stops being about tidiness and starts being about your brain. Psychologists have a name for this weight. They call it cognitive load. Your working memory, the part of your mind that holds whatever you're actually dealing with right now, is shockingly small. It can juggle only a handful of things at once before it starts quietly dropping them. And here's the cruel twist. It doesn't only fill up with your thoughts. It fills up with your surroundings, too. Researchers who study attention have found that visual clutter genuinely competes for your focus. When your eyes take in a crowded scene, the objects in it fight each other for processing power, and your brain has to burn energy suppressing the ones you're trying to ignore. You don't notice the effort. You just feel the result. A low hum of tiredness you can't explain. You cleaned nothing, you decided nothing, and somehow you're already a little drained. Think about the difference between working at a clear desk and working at a cluttered one. Same task, same you, but on the cluttered desk, some small part of your mind is always half tracking the mug, the receipts, the tangle of cables. It's a tax you pay without ever seeing the bill. And you pay it every single hour you sit there. Nobody hands you a receipt. You just end the day wondering why your head feels so full when you barely did anything at all. So the minimalist isn't being cold or austere. They walked onto that same crowded stage, felt their one spotlight getting yanked in 9 directions, and did the only sane thing left to do. They started clearing the stage. Does that reframe it a little? But here's where it gets interesting, because it goes deeper than a messy room. It isn't only objects crowding the stage, it's choices. Every single thing you own is a tiny open decision, sitting there, unresolved. Keep it or toss it. Use it or feel a small pang of guilt for not using it. Repair it or replace it. The 30 shirts hanging in your closet aren't 30 conveniences. On a tired morning, they're 30 small negotiations before you've even had coffee. The psychologist Barry Schwartz called this the paradox of choice. We assume that more options always make us freer and happier. It feels obvious. But past a certain point, more options do the exact opposite. They breed second guessing. They breed that low, itchy anxiety that maybe you chose wrong, that a better option was sitting right there and you somehow missed it. So the minimalist isn't rejecting choice because they're rigid or controlling. They notice something. Every option they remove is one less quiet argument with themselves. Fewer things to choose between. Fewer things to clean and store and maintain. Fewer things whispering from the edge of the stage. They traded the illusion of endless possibility for something that actually feels like calm. You know that odd little relief of a nearly empty fridge when dinner just kind of decides itself? No agonizing, no standing there with the door open. It's that exact feeling, just scaled up to an entire life. But here's the part nobody warns you about. If less is so freeing, why does letting go feel so awful? You've felt it. You pick up something you haven't touched in 3 years, and your hand just will not open. It's a chipped mug, a shirt you'll never wear again, and still, something in you clenches. There's a reason for that, and it's older than you. Psychologists Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky showed that human beings feel the sting of losing something far more sharply than the joy of gaining it. Losing hurts roughly twice as much as winning feels good. They called it loss aversion. And there's a strange cousin to it called the endowment effect, where the simple fact that you own a thing makes you value it more than you ever would in a store. So the object isn't holding on to you. Your own wiring is. For most of human history, gathering and keeping was survival. Throwing away a working tool could get you killed. That instinct never left. It just followed you into a world of closets that overflow and drawers that won't shut. Which means the minimalist isn't naturally gifted at letting go. They feel that same clench you do. They've just learned to notice it, thank it, and set the mug down anyway. That's not coldness. That's practice. Now, I have to be careful here, because minimalism gets badly misunderstood in two directions at once. On one side, people picture the aesthetic, the all-white room, the $300 minimalist chair, the perfectly curated shelf that costs more empty than most people's shelves cost full. But that's just consumerism wearing a quieter outfit. Buying expensive emptiness is not the same as owning less. And on the other side, there's a real difference worth naming. This is not the same as simply being broke. Going without because you have no choice is genuinely hard, and I don't want to romanticize it. But true minimalism is the opposite of scarcity. It's abundance you could have, and are deliberately choosing to set down. The empty shelf of someone who couldn't afford to fill it, and the empty shelf of someone who decided not to, look identical from the outside. Inside, they are completely different rooms. One is a lack, the other is a decision. Which brings us to the part that explains everything. Because if minimalism were only about mental quiet, there's a shortcut. You could just shove everything into a closet, shut the door, and call it peace. Out of sight, out of mind. But that is not what these people actually do. They don't hide their things. They face them one by one, and they choose. When you can only keep a little, every object has to earn its place. And the question quietly changes. It stops being, can I afford this? And becomes, does this actually matter to me? That second question is a values question. It's you deciding over and over in small and tangible ways what your life is even for. This is why minimalism so often shows up in people moving through some kind of clarity. After a loss, after a burnout that hollowed them out, after a version of themselves finally stopped fitting. Clearing the physical space is really them asking a much harder question underneath it. Of everything I'm carrying, what do I actually want to keep carrying? The empty shelf, it turns out, isn't a lack of anything. It's a decision, made visible. So let's go back to that room, the one you walked into that made you exhale without meaning to. Here's the truth. There is nothing wrong with the person who lives there, and there was never anything wrong with you for feeling drawn to it. They're not poor. They're not cold. They're not quietly depriving themselves of some richer, fuller life that everyone else gets to have. They looked at a limited resource, their attention, their one and only spotlight, and they refused to let it get shattered across 100 things that didn't matter. That isn't emptiness. That's aim. Because minimalism was never really about having less. It was about the stage finally being clear enough that the spotlight could land on what you actually love. The people who matter, the work that means something, the quiet where you can finally hear yourself think. An empty room is not a room missing its furniture. It's a room with space in it. Space for a thought to finish. Space for a person to sit down across from you. Space for you. You were never behind for wanting that. You were just tired of carrying a full stage in a world that keeps handing you more to hold. And setting some of it down was never giving up. It was choosing. If any part of this felt like it was describing your own home or the home you secretly wish you had, I genuinely want to hear about it. Leave a comment with the one thing you own that would never, ever leave your stage. The single object that earns its light. I read every single one of them. And the next time you stand in a room that feels too full, remember this. You don't have to fill the space to prove that your life is full. Sometimes the fullest thing you can own is room to breathe. Subscribe to keep decoding yourself, and I'll see you in the next.